Hello and welcome to History for Weirdos.
We're your hosts, Andrew
and Stephanie.
And each week, we're going to take you on a journey into the strange, obscure, and relentlessly entertaining corners of human history.
Now listen up, friends, because it's about to get weird. Welcome back, Weirdos. Here we are with another episode of History for Weirdos, and this week, Andrew's going to regale us with a tale.
Oh yes, and a tale I have. Thank you so much, Steph. And you know what? This week, I don't think we have anything to say to the Weirdos before, so let's just jump right in, yeah?
Yeah, no announcements. Watch us finish recording and be like, oh my god, we forgot to tell them this. But from what we could tell, no announcements. So why don't you just jump right in, and what story are you going to tell us?
Yes, so let me ask you a question first. When you think of the Spanish Inquisition, what typically do you think of?
That's a really good question. I tend to think of torture. I tend to think of people being tortured for some reason, and I think of the church. I think of Spain.
I mean, that's also fair.
And that's about it. To be honest, I know that it's a common saying, like, what is this, the Spanish Inquisition or something? But I don't really know anything about it.
Right. When you think of but actually, what was the Inquisition? Like, what was it? People are like, I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, and to be honest, like when I first started researching, I knew frighteningly little about it. I just pretty much could probably tell you what you told me.
Yeah. Well, then tell us, what was it about?
So you might think of it as an event or possibly like a series of events, right? Involving large-scale religious persecutions, like you said. And you'd be partially right as that did happen, but you'd also be missing a pretty key component here. So the Spanish Inquisition,
Say that 3 times fast.
Spanish Inquisition.
Oh.
Okay.
Oh, we did it that time.
We did it. Wow. Okay. The Spanish Inquisition was essentially a council or a tribunal set to pass judgment upon people.
So Catholic.
I know, right?
That's Catholic core if I've ever heard it before.
Catholic core. So it was established in 1478 by the Spanish crown under King Ferdinand II and Queen Isabella I. And it was formally titled the Tribunal of the Holy Office of the Inquisition, as it was meant to take over from the older medieval Inquisition that had been run directly by the Vatican.
Oh, wow.
Yes. This time, though, the Spanish crown would have direct oversight and essentially run the Inquisition, not the church.
That's so interesting.
Yes, though ostensibly it would be on behalf of the church.
Okay. So they're like outsourcing to the Spanish crown.
That's literally, I didn't even think about it like that, but that is 100% correct.
Yeah. The Vatican knows how to delegate.
Yeah, they are delegating, literally. Okay. And also, just to give a little bit of background, I didn't even put this in my notes, but Ferdinand and Isabella, they were the monarchs that requisitioned Christopher Columbus, for example.
Yes, that's what I was thinking of, actually. I was like, are they the Christopher Columbus ones?
Yes, like in 1492 alone, they completed the Reconquista of Spain, which I'll get into in a little bit, and they also sent Christopher Columbus on his voyage.
So we can assume they're not the best judges of character. Their instincts can lead them astray, perhaps?
You could, although they're probably a lot smarter than you think, maybe even slightly insidious. They are, and it's interesting because they're called the Catholic monarchs. When just if you were to Google them and type in the Catholic monarchs, it's these two that are referenced.
Because they're like Catholic cops, it sounds like.
I think, they're like, I don't know, they're uber Catholics.
That's dangerous.
So the goal of the Inquisition, back to this, was to identify and persecute heretics within the Catholic Church, specifically those individuals who had converted to the faith from Islam or from Judaism, at least in its original version.
Okay.
Because what you might not know is that the Inquisition would last all the way up to the 19th century, the 1800s.
Really?
Yes.
Oh my gosh.
It lasted for centuries.
Oh no, that's bad.
Yeah. I mean, it would take on many lives during this time.
Right.
But like the really bad stuff that you think about is in like the late 1400s, early 1500s.
Okay, that's what I think of, yeah.
Yeah. And it would take, again, it would take on many lives. And we're only going to be taking or examining kind of like the first 50 to 75 years-ish, mostly. So a lot of what I'm referencing is really specifically toward those times because that was the bloodiest time.
Yeah.
Though, again, it did last for centuries, like I mentioned. But before we jump right into, religious persecutions and terror, let's talk about how we got here in the first place.
I would love to know.
So the Reconquista, I mentioned that earlier, right? Spain had been a battleground for powerful foreign enemies now for centuries. I mean, going back all the way to the 3rd century BC, you had Romans and Carthaginians. They're battling it out there. Those are two foreign enemies battling it out like on the Iberian Peninsula. Then the Romans slowly but surely colonized the entirety of the Iberian Peninsula. That's modern day Spain and Portugal, fighting like various Celtic Iberian peoples. Then you had like large scale migrations centuries later by Germanic peoples like the Visigoths in late antiquity.
Yes.
They would ironically fight the Romans and, what was left of the Celt Iberians, but they had pretty much been co-opted by the Romans at that point. And then even centuries later, you'd have the Islamic invasions and subsequent conquering of Spain during the early 8th century AD by the Umayyad Caliphate.
Ooh.
So it's a battleground, foreign powers now for centuries.
Yeah.
And for the next 700 years or so, the various Christian kingdoms and the Islamic caliphates, which they would even change over time as well. The Umayyad would later be supplanted by the Abbasid Caliphate. They would just duke it out on and off.
Right.
Centuries.
Right.
Just fighting each other.
And saying, my religion's better.
Right.
So we deserve this land.
Exactly.
No, my religion's better.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of silly. It's more than kind of silly.
Yeah.
But I also have to mention that these are like the kingdoms, like these are the states battling it out. Like people always forget about like the common person, and I'll get into it a little bit, but there didn't seem to be as much animosity at that level as there was at the higher levels.
That's really interesting.
Yes. I mean, eventually though, I'm summarizing centuries here, so please bear with me, but eventually Christian kingdoms would coalesce and form modern-day Spain and Portugal, while slowly but surely fighting and expelling, Islamic forces bit by bit during this time. And again, this is called the Reconquista, like literally called the reconquering in Spanish. So during the 12th century, the Reconquista was mainly focused on developing the kingdoms of Portugal, Aragon, and Leon Castile. One of the monarchs, and I forget which one is which, but one of the monarchs that I mentioned, Ferdinand, is from, I believe he's the one from Leon Castile, but don't take my word for it.
We're quoting you on that.
Yeah. And then Isabella was from Aragon. And not Aragorn, Aragon.
Thank you.
Yes. And during this time, there was just a great deal of repopulation, including a resurgence of actually Muslims in the Granada region, which is southeastern Spain on the Mediterranean coast. So there is, even though like, you have Christian kingdoms kind of gathering more power, there still are like migrations of just regular people. So during this time, there was a really interesting fusion of different cultures, and Spain kind of got this reputation as a sort of exotic place.
Right.
Because although the Christian and Islamic forces are fighting each other, or even themselves, honestly, at time, which happened quite often, there's tons of infighting, the common people still, conducted trade, they shared in their customs, and it resulted in a really unique place.
Yeah, that's why a lot of words in Spanish come from Arabic.
Yes, exactly. And it's from this period. So similar to, it's kind of interesting because I do see a correlation here between the way that Italian Romans viewed the Eastern Mediterranean Romans about like a millennium prior is actually a very apt comparison of like what's going on now. Really interesting. And also, I should mention that there were Jewish populations throughout Spain as well. Although they were a smaller population than that of the Christians and the Muslims, they would still be a target of persecution.
Yeah, of course.
Because of course. We'll go over that later, though. Now, back on topic here, the Reconquista. As we get to the latter half of the 15th century, there's a significant event that happens, and this is the marriage of King Ferdinand II and Queen Isabella, excuse me. So, and I was wrong. King Ferdinand is from Aragon, and Queen Isabella is from Castile.
Yeah, that's how she's known. I just realized Isabella of Castile.
Yes, exactly. And
we figured it out. That's all that matters.
Yeah, that's all that matters. And that was on October 19th, 1469.
What a good year. I remember it well.
Yeah. And you know how I was saying that like the Spanish kingdoms, especially the Spanish Christian kingdoms, were like kind of coalescing. These were pretty much like the last two major. There was another one, I believe, maybe even another two, but these by far comprised pretty much mostly of the Iberian Peninsula. So with the union here, a lot of historians actually consider this to be kind of the de facto creation of modern day Spain.
Right. That makes sense.
So it's kind of a big deal in its own right. And the implication of this is pretty clear from the beginning when viewed in the context of the Reconquista, right? It's just going into overdrive at this point, right? They're gonna finish like the job, so to speak. And you know, fun fact, they married all of their children off to secure alliances, which isn't in itself very surprising. But what is interesting is that their youngest child, a daughter by the name of Catherine, would become the first wife of none other than
my arch nemesis, Henry VIII.
Exactly. There you have it.
Yeah, I knew. Pobrecita.
Yes. And her child would be known to history as Queen Mary I of England.
Bloody Mary.
Boom.
Yeah.
You literally stole it out of my mouth.
Very unfortunate nickname to have. Because
I think she kind of earned it.
Yeah, you got to do some dark stuff. I know it sounds punk rock, but it's not good vibes.
It's like fascist punk rock.
Yeah.
That's like such a misnomer. That's not even real.
I know.
But anyways, these back to Ferdinand and Isabella, they were the monarchs to charter the infamous exploration of Christopher Columbus to the New World starting in 1492.
Boo.
And again, I already mentioned this, but that was also the year that they brought their Reconquista to an end when they conquered the last remnant of Islamic rule on the Iberian Peninsula with the fall of the Nasrid Kingdom of Granada.
And is it Granada where you can go today and you see a lot of Islamic influence in the architecture? Was that the region?
Yes, it is.
Very cool.
That makes sense.
Yeah. It looks beautiful. I've only seen this online, but have you been in person? I
haven't, but I've seen a lot of the like pictures, and I know what you're referencing is the really famous horseshoe arches.
Yeah,
they're beautiful.
The beautiful detailed sort of like lattice patterns in the windows and things like that. And Weirdos, the reason I'm asking Andrew if he's been is because he did his study abroad in Spain.
Yes, and I lived there for almost 4 months, and I don't think I ever went to Granada.
It's because you were too hungover, I'm sure.
That's probably accurate, sadly. So, starting as early as the 14th century, the Jewish population in Spain was a primary target of the local Catholic orthodoxy. Many Jewish folks were forced to convert to Christianity during this time, and those who converted were referred to as conversos, and they still face deep suspicion. It was known that a lot of conversions weren't real. Shocking, I know.
When you force people to convert and they don't really feel it in their hearts, how weird.
Yeah, crazy. And the Jewish folks who continued their worship in secret were called marranos.
Oh my gosh.
Is that a bad word?
Pigs?
Oh my God.
Yeah. Let me see the word.
Marranos?
Yeah, pigs.
Oh my God.
Yes. You know the cookies we make around Christmas?
Oh, marrancitos.
The marranitos, yeah.
Marranitos, yeah.
Little pigs.
Wow, that is really messed up.
That's really messed up, but unsurprising.
Clearly, I didn't pick up on that.
Yeah, and you mentioned this briefly. Andrew hadn't told me really anything about this episode except I was talking to him about my family. My mom's family is from Mexico. My mom's from Mexico. And I don't remember how we got on the subject, but I was telling you that my mom's mom, her dad's parents, So what are they to me? Grandma, great-great-grandparents.
Yeah.
They were Jewish. And I found that very surprising because my family is very Catholic. But it came up on my 23andMe ancestry. So I had asked my abuela about it. And she was like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. Like, my dad's parents were Jewish. And you said, oh, maybe they were conversos because they were Spanish.
Right.
So that's so interesting.
It very well could have been.
I wonder if, even though their family at some point, quote unquote, converted, if the faith really stayed for that long, that many generations later.
Yeah, they were Maranos. I don't like saying that now. Now I know what it means.
Yeah, no, it's pretty messed up.
That's really bad. Jeez. Well, anyways.
We'll use conversos.
Conversos, yeah. So unfortunately for them, Ferdinand and Isabella considered the Maranos the greatest, specifically them.
Yes.
The greatest threats to the unification of a Christian Spain.
I feel like they needed another hobby, like maybe making sourdough bread.
Oh, you see, I actually have some thoughts about this, but I'm saving it to the end for my analysis.
Ooh.
I have thoughts on this.
You have analysis to give us.
Oh, come on. Do I? This guy? Oh, yeah, I do.
I can't wait.
So they were convinced, that is, Ferdinand and Isabella, that corruption within the church was the result of Jewish converts to Christianity who had not truly converted. That was their big fear. The conversos were accused of myriad of crimes, including being the reason for the plague, literally, and lesser offenses such as poisoning water supplies and abducting Christian boys.
This is so disgusting.
I feel like none of this is true. Like, this is like literally like, are you just joking?
It's just anti-Semitism.
Yeah, like actually, like, it's insane. And, you know, Ferdinand and Isabella, they wanted to do something about it, and now they were in a position to do so. Mm-hmm. So, 1478, Pope Sixtus IV, he received a plea from Ferdinand and Isabella asking for permission to search out and persecute heretics in Spain and her colonies.
Oh, no.
So that's important. Spain and her colonies. Mm-hmm. They wanted to form an inquisition, again, which itself is not a new concept.
Right.
But this time it would be under their control and not that of the Pope.
Right. Because they're outsourcing.
Exactly. They're outsourcing. They're doing what corporations are doing now, but centuries ahead of time. Mm-hmm. They're just
forward thinking.
Forward thinking in the worst way possible. So this is important because the implication is very important. So this could be a tool that the crown could use to get whatever they wanted under the guise of doing it for the church, for Christendom.
For God.
For God, yes.
Damn.
I mean...
That's quite a card to play.
I was like, as someone who knows intimate history of like the 20th century when it comes to kind of rogue and deep state like warfare, they're way ahead of their time. Mm-hmm. I know what they're doing. But from my, and again, so like from my perception, it's really about control.
Yes.
That's what I think.
Oh my gosh, that's such a good way of putting it.
Yes, it's about getting control and getting rid of people that got in their way. That's the way I view it. This is my own interpretation. Yes. This is not like 100% factual.
Yes, and you can accuse someone that you don't like or that doesn't go with your agenda, and you can say they are committing acts against God, right? And then everyone's going to have your back and be like, yeah, you got to go get rid of them.
And we'll talk about that later in my analysis because you're spot on. So get this. 4 years into the Inquisition, so now what year is this? This would be 1482. The Pope was made aware of the excessively brutal methods being used by the Spanish inquisitors.
Right.
And he vocally condemned their actions. But he couldn't do anything about it.
Because he had outsourced.
it.
Oh my gosh, you have to vet your people. This is why you do a 7-round interview process. To see what they're about.
Guys, this is a joke.
Yeah, this is totally a joke. But that's shocking. The fact that this was the church's idea, right? This is something that was not new to them. Mm-hmm. But when they handed it over to the Spanish crown, they're like, oh my God, this is really bad.
Yeah, and you can definitely think that at this time, like the Vatican was not, or really anyone was not thinking about second order effects. Like, what are the consequences of me doing this? It might seem like a good idea, but what is it going to lead to down the line that may be disastrous? And boom, case in point.
Right.
People just didn't, I don't think, thought about it like that back then. So it's also safe to say that pretty early on, the Spanish were condemned outside of Spain by their Christian neighbors.
Whoa.
And this is before Protestantism. So
it's not because of that.
Exactly. Everyone else is like, yo,
so the
what are you
other
doing?
Catholic countries or Christian and Catholic countries are not in alignment with Spain.
Exactly.
And the way they're treating the Inquisition.
In fact, and I'll get into it later, they use their persecutions as sources of propaganda, anti-Spanish propaganda.
Oh, very
the British in
interesting.
particular.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
Yes. So on two separate occasions even, so in 1484 and 1509, Pope Innocent VIII and Pope Julius II, respectively, tried to allow Spanish citizens to make appeals to Rome itself regarding the Inquisition. But King Ferdinand replied each time by saying that anyone who tried to petition Rome without consent from the monarchy would be confiscated and sentenced to death.
Someone's got a little bit power hungry. So someone let that extra boost of power go to his head.
And just to be clear, I find that incredibly unchill.
Yeah. That's a really good way of putting it.
Thank you.
You can quote Andrew on that one.
Yeah, you can say it's unchill. So the Inquisition was created under the authority of clergyman Thomas de Torquemada to investigate suspected heresy within the Converso community, as well as strengthen religious education. That was also like kind of a secondary thing as well.
Because what better way to control people than educating them with this narrative that you are pushing?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So by 1481, 20,000 conversos admitted to heresy, hoping to receive a lesser punishment. However, the penance for their crimes was to identify other heretics.
No.
So you could just see how this goes.
It's going to go on forever.
Yeah, it's not a good thing.
That's so sad.
It really is.
20,000.
20,000.
That's disgusting. I could see why even the Vatican was like, this is absurd.
Yeah, no, it's insane. Ridiculous. So by the end of that year, hundreds, if not thousands of individuals were burned at the stake.
Oh,
yeah.
That's so heartbreaking.
So in 1483, all Jewish folks were expelled from Andalusia, like in southern Spain. And then in 1492, January, the Alhambra decree was issued that all Jewish peoples were to be expelled from Castile and Aragon, basically all of Spain.
Right. Right. You're just going to push everyone out that doesn't fall in line with what you believe.
Right.
Okay.
And it's really interesting because they mainly fled to other Christian lands, ironically enough, usually either Portugal or Italy, though some of them did go to Islamic North Africa. The way this whole thing worked, especially like the Inquisition specifically at this early stage, started with a quote unquote edict of grace.
Okay.
So kind of getting into like how this mechanically worked.
Yeah.
Hoping to encourage people to come forth and incriminate themselves.
Okay.
I know. The Inquisition would arrive in a city and publicly announce that if you confessed your sins within the first 30 to 40 days of arrival, you'd be given a light punishment, hence the Edict of Grace.
Can you imagine being an everyday person, right? So very limited resources, very limited education, and having something so powerful roll into town and tell you basically like, we're going to catch you either way. We're going to find out. But if you first say something, we won't be as harsh to you. You don't have other options. There's nowhere else to turn to. Of course, you're going to be like, oh, okay, yeah, let me come forward. It's just so sad.
Oh, it's insanely sad. And you're right. Like they're really taking advantage of the common folk here.
Yeah.
I know. And it's, again, I truly think it's for control.
Absolutely.
Like you can control through fear pretty effectively, especially at this time. So hoping to encourage people, again, to incriminate themselves, you have 30 to 40 days. Chill, right? Nah, not chill. Because neighbor would often accuse neighbor, friend would accuse friend, and so on and so forth. And a lot of the time, it was actually, from a strategic point of view, it was better just to come out and admit it right away, because if you did that and admit to heresy, you could just deal with the consequences early on, as opposed to just waiting for someone to incriminate you, unrightfully so, and then you get even harsher punishment. And that's what a lot of people, they knew they were innocent, and they just still came like, yeah, my neighbor John hates me.
Yeah.
He's going to turn me in regardless. So yeah, what's up?
And the crime is just not being truly Catholic.
Correct.
Which is absurd in and of itself. I know we all know this, but like, not a crime. Like, I have to confess to this thing that shouldn't even matter.
Right.
Because it's what I do in my home and
yes.
what my family believes in or doesn't believe in. Ay, Dios.
I love how you said that in Spanish too. So the trials for those accused of heresy, they were long, very bureaucratic events, unsurprisingly. So initially, each of the trials included 2 inquisitors, a calificador, a qualifier, an alguacil, a bailiff, and a fiscal, or a prosecutor, though new positions were added as time went on. And this it kind of was a hydra and sort of taking on like multiple lives of itself and growing more and more heads.
Right. You said a word, calificador?
Yeah.
When you are talking about your grades in Spanish, people ask you, ¿cuáles son tus calificaciones?
Oh, really?
Yeah. What are your grades? That's what it means.
Huh. There you go.
I had never heard it used like that.
Well, they were getting graded, apparently.
That must be the origin of it.
Yes, and not in a fun way.
No.
I mean, tests weren't fun, but this, I'm assuming, would be
less fun.
Much less fun.
Much less fun than a math test, yes.
Yeah, I'd rather take a math test than be put on trial. But we'll get into that. So the accused would be forced to wear monks' robes and shackles.
Dude, are you serious?
Yeah. They were never told exactly what their crimes were.
Right.
Other than heresy, and they were never allowed to know even who made the accusation, sorry.
So you're entitled to nothing. You know nothing.
Right, like you can't...
You just know you've been accused. You don't know exactly of what, and you're punished immediately.
Exactly. So, I mean, you're getting accused, like today, you can face your accuser in court. You couldn't do that here.
Wow. How disempowering.
Yeah, it really sucked. So... options for kind of reconciliation varied, right? An accused person could repent, promising to be a good, faithful, practicing Christian from here on out, or accept forced reconciliation where they would be essentially tortured until they repented.
I wonder which one people are going to pick.
Yeah, exactly. Those who reconciled quickly were allowed to live, albeit in shame, right? Reconciled heretics were forced to wear a San Benito, which was like a conical hat, like a dunce cap, that would mark you as a reconciled heretic.
What? The public humiliation piece of this I was not aware of.
Yeah, I didn't know that either.
This is like such psychological torture on so many levels.
That's a really good way of putting it. It was psychological torture.
Terrible.
But even worse were the ones who didn't repent, right? They're like, no, I'm innocent. I'm not a heretic. I don't know what you're talking about. They were just often put to death for their crimes. Wow. Crimes.
Right. Andrew's doing air quotes for those not watching the video.
Yes. So they would be held in prisons. They would be tortured, just repeatedly brought in front of the tribunal to confess. Public executions only occurred every few months, interestingly. So prisoners would be tortured until their next execution date.
Oh my gosh. So in a way, you're probably hoping, I hope the next execution date is soon.
Yeah.
I hope I get executed quickly.
Yes.
Wow.
That's terrible.
What an awful situation to be in for no good reason.
Yeah, probably because you possess land that someone else wants, or maybe the king wants,
Pissed off the wrong person, maybe.
Exactly. So these public executions were called auto de fe, or auto da fe, act of faith.
Acto de fe.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's an older Spanish dialect or version of it.
Oh, yeah, you're right. It would be like Old English for us.
Yeah, I think so.
Oh, how interesting. I didn't think of that.
So on the morning of the execution, those who were set to be executed were shackled together and they marched through the public square.
This sounds like Game of Thrones.
It really does.
Mm-hmm.
Clergymen gave multiple sermons and offered the condemned one last chance to repent. And even if you decided that moment, you know what, let's go, I repent at this last minute, you were still killed.
Yes, and they would probably offer that you repent this one last chance to repent because they wanted to prove to the people watching that you were quote unquote bad, that you were a criminal of sorts, and their promise of, oh, well, it's good that you repented because now you'll go to heaven.
Right.
Or your chances go up. That's your prize.
It's like, buddy, you putting people to death.
That's not going to get you.
Yeah, it's not getting you into heaven, homie.
Yeah. It's so, I can't even believe humans sometimes. I just can't.
Like, it's so amazing, like the technological genius that sometimes we have. And then like the advancements we make, it's so incredible. And then you hear stuff like this, or you just go online and you're just like, oh my God.
Look at the comment section and you're like, what has humanity come to? Yeah. Humanity's always been this way. Humanity's always been
That's true.
Pretty messed up.
Pretty dumb, pretty messed up.
Yes. We can do better.
Yeah, we just get like we just get swept up in these like religious fervors or just stupidity, and we just go on a tangent.
Yes.
Or on a rampage, excuse me. I wish we would go on a tangent.
You and I go on a lot of tangents.
We do. Mm-hmm. I think that was just deep in the recess of my mind. So these 11th hour repentant prisoners, they were strangled to death before having their bodies burned at the stake.
Wow.
The rest of the prisoners were just burned alive at the stake.
My gosh.
Yeah.
This breaks my heart and churns my stomach.
So to make matters worse, prisoners' families would then receive a bill for the cost of imprisonment, torture, and execution.
You get a bill from the government because they tortured and killed your family member?
I feel like our federal government would do this.
Someone's going to listen to this
And they're like, that's actually a great idea.
Wait, let me pitch that to my boss.
I know. Fascist.
That's insane.
No, it is. It's actually insane.
What would happen? Do you know what would happen if you didn't pay?
Oh, I don't know.
Probably imprisonment.
Probably imprisonment. Yeah. You're up next.
Yes.
Well, remember what I said about control?
Absolutely.
Listen to this. There has been a lot of evidence suggesting that the torture of the Inquisition was used as a tool for extracting confessions and gathering intel rather than a method of actually just like killing the accused.
Okay.
So the methods of torture seem to be highly bureaucratic and organized. Like the inquisitors also, they weren't stupid, right? They knew that torture wasn't necessarily the most reliable method of gathering information.
Right, because when you're being physically tortured, you'll say anything to make it stop.
Yeah, exactly. And those being tortured would likely, just say whatever it was that they believe the torturers just wanted to hear.
Yes.
And to relieve their pain, right? So again, it kind of goes back to that control. It's like, okay, we're going to force these people to come out and say something, right, that we know not to be true, but we need as evidence to maybe escheat property from someone.
Yes.
And these methods of torture, by the way, included starvation, being covered in hot coals, getting stretched by the rack.
Oh, wow.
Maybe like a little bit of stretching on the rack would actually help my back.
I don't think so.
Maybe not. I just cracked it, funny enough. Hot pokers and pincers, and even consuming large amounts of liquid and be forced to hold it.
What? Your bladder can burst.
Yeah, and it could kill you.
That's insane.
No, they're horrible. Another horrible method was called the strappado.
Okay.
So, yeah, this is awful. But this is where the hands of the accused were tied behind the person's back, and the rope was looped like over a brace in the ceiling or attached to like a pulley. Mm-hmm. And the subject was raised until, he was hanging from his arms, right? They were tied behind his back. So they're going up in the air.
Yeah.
And they would just constantly like bring him up, bring him down, bring him up, bring him down. And this could cause like your shoulders pop out of their sockets.
Yeah, of course.
And also, sometimes the torturers would add a series of like really sudden drops, jerking the subject up and down, right? Kind of like I mentioned. And weights could even be added to the ankles and feet to make the hanging more painful.
This is so awful.
So now all of this coincided with the beginning of the transatlantic Spanish Empire, right? And remember, like I said, Spain and her colonies.
Yeah.
So the Inquisition spread to all of Spain's new territories. Though, interestingly, it was made clear by Ferdinand from the very beginning that the Inquisition did not apply to indigenous peoples, only to Europeans and their descendants.
That's really interesting.
And I don't, I guess, like, that's better. But, like, also very strange that he pointed that out.
That is weird because here in the Americas, I mean, the Spanish were known for forced conversions all the time.
It was probably after his time, Ferdinand's time.
That's so weird.
But
it's not like they were nice to the indigenous people.
No, they were not. Yeah.
So why be like, all of a sudden you got a little bit of a little Jiminy Cricket on your shoulder telling you like, well, maybe leave them alone on this one.
Yeah, your own people in Spain, absolutely. If they believe in like a different, being than you do, or a version of a being, not even a different being, a different version of a being or whatever. Yeah, we're gonna kill them.
We're gonna torture and kill them.
There we go, torture and kill them. But other folks, no.
So odd. There's no logic here.
There's no rationale. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, maybe just don't do that to anyone.
Exactly.
I don't know. Crazy thought. And of course, it was mainly converted Jewish folks who had converted, those conversos, and the Muslims who had converted as well. They were called Moriscos.
Mariscos?
M-O-R, not M-A-R.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, probably because of the Moors.
Yeah, I think
the Moorish
so.
people. Mariscos means like seafood. That's why I was confused. I was like, pigs and seafood. What is this?
Yeah, what is this?
No, Moriscos. Okay.
Yeah. And again, like for the first 50 or so years of the Inquisition, they were the main targets, but it wasn't always the case. So later on, King Philip II, who ruled from like 1556 to 1598, for example, strengthened the Inquisition from like a civil power perspective. He even took the Inquisition to the Netherlands, where Lutherans were hunted and burned at the stake.
Oh my gosh, you want to take your evil and just spread it around.
Yeah, so it's not just, the conversos and the Moriscos. It's also, Lutherans and probably other sort of Protestants as well. And as time passed, the Moriscos and the conversos were always like on and off targeted, right?
Of course.
Like, again, even much later, like 1609 to 1615, when specifically 150,000 Moriscos were expelled from Spain.
That's wild.
150,000.
The fact that they were able to maintain such hatred and violence and just behavior that even their contemporaries saw as atrocious for so long.
I mean, yeah, this is 1609 to 1615. So we're talking about well over a century after it started. Crazy. So when evaluating the Spanish Inquisition, it's really hard to understand the true extent of damage done. So historian Marcelino Menendez y Pelayo, he wrote in 1953 of the Inquisition, "Why is there no industry in Spain? Because of the Inquisition. Why are the Spanish lazy? Because of the Inquisition. Why do the Spanish take a siesta? Because of the Inquisition. Why are there bullfights in Spain? Because of the Inquisition."
Wow.
Yes. Now, whether or not this is strictly true can be debated. However, it does illustrate that there was a decline in knowledge and industry over time that took place while this was happening in Spain. Which,
of course.
Duh.
Your people are not going to prosper if they're constantly living under fear.
Exactly.
And you're keeping them ignorant and oppressed.
I mean, I find it so interesting that Ferdinand and Isabella, they really wanted a unified Spain, and a strong unified Spain, I should say. And in reality, what they did is ultimately they sowed the seeds of their own destruction. I won't say destruction necessarily, but like, Spain is not a powerhouse today. And you can probably trace it back to this.
Right.
Or at least one of the reasons, right? There's many, many reasons, but this is probably a pretty serious one.
That's a good point.
So for me personally, it really is no surprise that the Spanish lost their dominance over the seas in the 16th century, especially in the latter part of the 16th century, because of this, right? With the mass exodus of oftentimes skilled workers, that would have long-term detrimental effects that are really hard to quantify.
Yeah.
But they're there nonetheless.
I mean, they'd be hard to quantify today when we have access to so much data, right? And technology, and you can track people so easily. It would be impossible to quantify it back then.
Oh my God.
There's no way.
Absolutely. So it's also unknown the amount of wealth that was stolen from the Jewish and Islamic communities because of the confiscations that had occurred, right? During one year of the Inquisition in Guadalupe, enough money was taken to fund the building of an entire royal residence.
Wow.
Yes, a big one at that.
Ugh.
And it was commonly stated that during this time, quote, only the rich were burnt, end quote.
Oh.
Kind of going back to what exactly you said earlier. So only recently have historians begun to fully research the records left by the Inquisition, right? And because of this, there is a great deal of uncertainty in facts and figures. So, for example, the Spanish archives from the period of 1540 and 1700 show 44,674 trials with only 826 executions and 776 executions performed ceremoniously by effigy, or like a post-mortem execution, because they tortured the guy that the person died.
Yeah, and then they're like, oops, we got to make an effigy and then execute that.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh my gosh.
So dumb. So, I mean, so if you were to put a number on this, only roughly about 3.6% of the time people were actually sentenced to death.
Okay.
Which is pretty low. So this kind of gives rise to a theory called the Black Legend, which basically says that much of what history remembers about the Inquisition stems from anti-Catholic and or anti-Spanish propaganda starting in the 16th century. Some of the proponents of this theory argue that topics such as the types of and severity of torture were over-exaggerated and taken out of context.
Interesting theory.
Yeah. The argument being that these kinds of actions weren't altogether uncommon during the time period, and that it was biased against the Spanish to specifically call them out. They also argue that the social and economic impact of the number of people believed to have been executed would have had serious ramifications and therefore unlikely to be accurate. But to be honest, now that I said all of that, I do have a lot of qualms with this theory. Firstly, there were texts written as early as the late 16th century that give pretty explicit detail of the trials and torture methods used, and even how the Inquisition was a very threat to like their lives. And when I say their lives, I mean like a lot of like European lives.
Yeah.
So this is like Europeans judging other Europeans, right? It's not like the people who were being persecuted even.
Right.
So there were folks who did speak out against the Inquisition and its brutality. I even mentioned the Pope himself, multiple popes. That's
pretty good evidence against this theory.
Yeah, it's very good evidence. And also, I didn't write this in my notes, but I just thought of it now and I want to specifically call it out. The records that they looked at were from 1540 earlier, but we know that from the inception, I think it was 1478, to then at that point were some of the worst times of this.
Yeah, there you go.
So, again, there are many records of people speaking out against the Inquisition, and even in the Spanish archives themselves. By the 17th century, countless individuals had published highly popular books that all talked about the Spanish people and culture, including what they called like the dark stain of Inquisition. So, however, the proponents of this theory do bring up a couple of good points if I'm just going to be completely impartial here, which is what I always want to do. So first off, in a nearly 150-year period during the Inquisition, there were roughly 3,600 cases of suspected witchcraft brought before the tribunal, and yet only 101 were found guilty.
Okay.
So a vast majority found not guilty. And this implies that there really was not an agenda against witchcraft, as you would expect for, like, you know, a semi-religious tribunal during this time, or at least a tribunal pretending to be religious.
Yeah, good way of putting it.
And also in the later years of the Inquisition, people would often opt to be tried in these tribunals, interestingly, rather than the normal civil courts, as the Inquisition prisons afforded more rights to prisoners than the secular prisons of the king, where they had fewer rights. But I think this was much later.
Yeah.
This would have been like during like the 18th century, maybe.
Okay.
So get this. Who do you think was the first person to bring an end to the Spanish Inquisition?
The first person to bring an end? I have no idea.
He is very famous.
I have no idea.
Napoleon Bonaparte.
What?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. No, I wouldn't have guessed that.
I did not know that.
Wow. How so?
Because he conquered Spain.
Oh, there you go. And he was like, this is dumb.
Yeah. So yeah, when he conquered Spain, like, albeit briefly, he ended it. But again, that didn't last because, ironically, another Ferdinand VII, assumed the crown in 1814, and he had the Inquisition reinstated. But that also didn't last very long because on July 15th, 1834, Ferdinand VII's widow, acting as queen regent to their daughter, ironically, Queen Isabella II.
Oh, that's so weird.
Formally ended the Inquisition.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is so weird. The Ferdinand and Isabella repeating.
Right.
Odd.
But
thank goodness.
Because she was only the second Isabella.
Yeah.
So it literally bookmarked with Isabella's.
With Isabella's.
Crazy.
I'm so glad that at least eventually someone put a stop to it.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
So before we wrap up, I just want to mention some of the more oddball things I think that came from the Spanish Inquisition. So evidence that was used to confirm an individual, or to confirm that an individual was a quote unquote crypto Jew, literally their terminology.
Okay.
So it was a member of the Jewish faith who had converted to Christianity, but really didn't. It was a later term. Could include, but was not limited to, no smoke coming from their chimneys on Saturday, the Sabbath, which is interesting. The purchase of vegetables rather than meat before Passover, bigamy, blasphemy, and sodomy.
Oh my gosh.
Unnatural marriages, which are marriages between two people who cannot procreate.
What?
Bestiality, pedophilia, and incest.
Oh my God.
Family crimes such as child abuse or neglect. I mean, like, you should prosecute those people, but not under this.
No, that's
thing.
different. You don't want those things to happen. That's entirely different.
Yeah, it's like,
are just trying to demonize a group of people. Exactly. Because they don't look how you look. They don't pray the way you pray. Like, this is
Or it's suspected they might even look how you look, which is even crazier. I mean, it shouldn't matter, but to them it would.
It's insane.
Yeah.
It's such BS. They don't actually care about those crimes.
Yes, exactly. And they could throw anything else out there, like including, like human trafficking, like, hardcore stuff like that, smuggling, forgery, tax fraud, espionage for foreign power, illegal weapons, etc.
So anything.
It really could be anything. So the Inquisition also used their authority for censorship, interestingly enough, as well.
Yep, I'm not surprised.
So in 1551, they released their first index of banned books.
There's nothing. Henry VIII and banned books grind my gears so much. It's so stupid. Weirdos, I already know you guys are so cool. You're so smart. You read banned books, but if you haven't, you should read banned books. You should look at banned books lists and wonder, why don't people want me to read this?
Yeah, exactly.
And just take your own objective approach to the book and see what you think.
Right. I mean, usually it comes down to money and or power. In this case,
same thing here.
Yeah. I mean, some things really do never change.
Yes.
So rather than always just banning these books outright, oftentimes incriminating passages or words would simply be like crossed out.
Shut up.
Yeah, a method which obviously proved to be useless, as access to these books by the elite and powerful remained free, and they weren't going to be typically the ones, unless it served another purpose, right? The ones to be actually prosecuted. But yeah, so that is like the story of the Spanish Inquisition. I know that it is a lot, and I purposely left out a lot of things that happened later on because it took on so many lives. And to be honest with you, this could be like a 6-hour episode if I really
I'm sure
went
it could
into
be
it.
its own podcast.
It could be its own podcast.
Yeah, breaking it down. But that's incredible. You taught me so many things in this episode. I truly didn't really know anything about it. It's more horrifying than I thought.
It really was,
Yeah.
And I mean, to be honest with you, I think what's crazy is we still feel the impacts of this today. I mean, especially if you live in Spain, you're really feeling the impacts of it today. But I mean, we see this over and over, this like disturbing phenomenon of like persecution based off of religious zeal. Mm-hmm. And like, guys, that's a bad thing. If you're listening to this podcast, you probably know that it's a bad thing.
Yes.
But if there's ever like any doubt, like, hey, maybe should I persecute this person based on their religious beliefs? Just don't.
It's never, ever going to go well for anyone.
Yeah, it's not, guys. It's not a good thing. I would say it's actually really unchill.
Yeah. I agree.
Yes. So, and I think one thing that we can learn from the mistake of this is, I think there's two things, right? The first being like, and this relentless pursuit of power, and how serving your own vanity, serving your own ego for power will ultimately lead to destruction.
For generations and generations.
Yeah, and people will curse you. So if you're really trying to serve your ego, you should maybe just make things better for people, and then people will praise you for, years on end, right? Instead of just being this, right? Looking at you, Ferdinand and Isabella, like, don't be those people, right? And then the second, again, is just, I don't know how else to say it, but like, don't do religious persecutions. Don't persecute people like based off of anything really.
A whole group of people.
Yeah, especially if they're not harming anyone, right?
Yeah.
Don't do that.
Well, that's pretty groundbreaking. So I think that's a good note to end the episode on.
I know. I feel like it's, I mean, clearly it's not common knowledge though. Like to me it is, and to you it is, and probably to everyone listening it is, but yeah.
This is why it's important to know your history.
Exactly. Boom. That's why you're listening to a history podcast.
You're so smart.
I know. Ironically, the people that should be listening to this are never going to listen to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and the
that's
people
very
who's,
true.
it's like, yeah, duh, are the ones listening.
Well, thank you for listening, Weirdos. We appreciate you so, so much. And Andrew, thank you for teaching us about the Spanish Inquisition.
Yes.
It was awful.
Hopefully the episode, you liked it, regardless of the awful content inside.
Yes, I really liked hearing about how awful this was.
It truly was awful.
And Weirdos, do not forget to share this episode with someone. That's a great way for new people to find the podcast, or to rate the podcast, leave a review, depending on where you listen. That also helps people find the show.
Yeah, exactly.
We need more Weirdos.
We do. We love you guys, and we want more of you.
Exactly. Until next time, Weirdos.
Until next time, adios.